Thank you for joining, everybody. Welcome. Thank you to the Darien Library for hosting this talk on the pollinator pathway. And I'm thrilled to be here. I've been working with Deepika and Juliet, who you're going to hear from at the end, for 2 or 3 years now. Darien was one of the first towns to join the pollinator pathway. We have a lot to tell you about tonight. I set up this talk at the beginning just as an introduction for people that aren't familiar with what the pollinator pathway is. And then towards the end, Deepika and Juliet are going to talk about what has been happening specifically in Darien this past year on the pollinator pathway. My name is Louise Washer. I work with the Norwalk River Watershed Association. Our goal, our focus, our mission is to protect water quality and wildlife habitat in the 7 Norwalk River watershed towns. And my work trying to protect water quality is what led me to a group of people that were talking about the idea of working to protect, to connect corridors, wildlife corridors, to protect pollinators. So I'm going to kind of go through that history. So I got involved with the pollinator pathway about 3 years ago, and on the steering committee of that, and that has taken over my life. So so here I am to talk about it. Pollinator pathway, if anybody's not familiar with it, it is the idea of creating of connecting our green spaces. If you look at these big blobs as the protected green spaces, our parks and our land trust lands, the problem for wildlife and pollinators in particular is that those protected open spaces are divided up and separated by our yards. And if we manage our yards as wildlife habitat, our properties can serve as the connectors to those open spaces and allow wildlife to move, to migrate, to find food, water, nesting, mates, to move in response to climate change and all the reasons that that they need to be able to move. So this is just another image. If you look at these green connector spaces here, it's just another illustration. But I love this picture down here because you look at the houses that have their neatly mowed lawns, and then you look at this one house in the middle that is connected to, it looks like maybe a tree farm or some kind of open space behind. And just by planting shrubs and managing that landscape a little bit differently, you could see if you were a bird or a butterfly flying over, which of those yards you would stop in to find what you need. So why do this? This is like my one bad news slide that I stick in here, just in case. I feel like everyone's really familiar with the colony collapse, the challenges that our honeybees are facing, that the 30% overwinter colony loss that has been tracked by the USDA for the last 10 years. We're all very familiar, I think, also with the monarch populations being down 90%. Doug Ptolemy says 94.6%. So we're really looking at maybe losing the monarch for lots of reasons that I'll talk about later on in the talk. But there's good news on the monarchs too, because of projects like Pollinator Pathway and people planting milkweed in their yard. We are seeing, especially on the East Coast, rebounds. So the other one of these statistics that I always like to mention is this German study that came out a couple of years ago. It was just a very well done scientific study. It showed a 76% decline in all flying insects. They were capturing or studying insects in a bunch of open spaces that they had really good data back 25 years. So that was the study that got the New York Times magazine to put the insect apocalypse as the cover story a couple of years ago. And I think that was sort of the time when people started waking up and saying, well, we need to do something about this. The other thing I like to mention is that for me anyway, when I started working on this, when I thought of bee, I just thought of honeybee. Honeybees were the only bees I really had ever paid much attention to. And honeybees are important. They're important to our farms and orchards. They're native to Europe, and we manage them kind of like we manage cattle or something. They're an agricultural, domesticated, basically imported helper for our native bees. And so what was the great discovery for me is that we have this great, amazing native bee diversity in Connecticut. There are 349 species in Connecticut, and I think it's something like 430 in New York. And they're all quite different. This picture I took in my yard, actually, and this is a digger bee or a miner bee. And I, by no means do I know the different bees, but I am starting to sort of be conscious of some of the types, like the little teeny sweat bees that are metallic green, beautiful little things that I think I would have always thought were flies before paying a little bit more attention. So the Pollinator Pathway's main objective is to plant and to encourage the planting of the native plants that our native pollinators need. So what is causing all of these declines? What are the threats? Loss and fragmentation of the land that we kind of talked about in those first illustrations. And this picture is a good illustration of what we've done to our landscape, fragmented it. 86% of land east of the Mississippi is privately owned. So we have pretty much carved up our landscape. And we think of it as Doug Ptolemy says, that we've set aside wildlife space, but there's not enough. So we really have to start rethinking the way we manage our own yards as wildlife, as being welcome. So pesticides, long chemicals, which I'm going to talk about more, invasive plants, and lack of diversity, which is green lawn is a good example of that. Climate change, and also light pollution, which really affects, that's keeping the lights on at night, that really affects moth and lightning bug populations. And the story of the Pollinator Pathway, just quickly, is that it started at the end of 2016. Connecticut passed the Pollinator Protection Act, which banned the sale of neonicotinoids, which are a pesticide that's particularly been associated with the declines in honeybees and native bees. You can't buy those as retail products anymore. Your landscaper can still use neonicotinoids, so it's important to ask to make sure, if you do use any kind of pesticides, even organic pesticides, that you ask what they are and you find out how they affect pollinators. But anyway, so it got started with an idea. We read about Donna Merrill, who's with the Wilton Land Trust, read about a community in Oslo, Norway, that had created a bee highway through the city. And she was like, we should try this. So she called me, because I'm with the Watershed Association. Wilton is one of our towns. We worked with the Nature Center and the Garden Club, the Land Trust, and the Watershed Association. And we mapped out a way to connect the open spaces through Wilton. And then I thought, wow, I should do this in all 7 of our watershed towns. This is such a great way to connect land, but also a platform for reaching out to, like, the New Canaan Land Trust. Why am I not already working with them? You know, it was a way to connect to these other communities and to sort of erase some of our town boundaries that we're all very apt to stay within. And then we met, and early on met Deepika and Juliet at a talk, and they were like, we want to do this. I remember Deepika saying, this should happen in Darien. I mean, I'm not going to be in charge of it, but this should really happen. And I remember thinking, yeah, you're going to be in charge of it. But, so from that time on, now it's in over 100 towns. Connecticut and New York is where it's really started, in Westchester and Fairfield counties, but now it's across Connecticut, it's up the Hudson, and Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Massachusetts have just suddenly, like in this summer, joined as well. So we're also partnering with the Northeast Organic Farm Association. We're working with Connecticut DOT, which is our biggest landowner, to change the mowing methods and to manage that land differently. MDC, second biggest landowner, is a big water company in Hartford. We just went and met with them. Audubon. So this idea and this collaboration of towns and people like you and me talking at library talks, literally, this is what this is having these big reverberations across our region. So it's really an exciting thing. And the message is simple. It's rethink your lawn, avoid pesticides, and plant native plants. That's our trio. And I'm going to kind of go through them a little bit. Why are lawns causing a problem? I mean, I have a lawn that I love, and we're not saying get rid of lawns, but we need to rethink the way we manage them. And the reason is that partly that they provide no habitat. They're a monoculture. There's no food, there's no nesting area for pollinators, birds, any wildlife. And then they also, because of the fact that we tend to use more fertilizer than is needed and put down pesticides because we're concerned about ticks and things, that those wash into our streams and get into the environment. And that's one of the problems. And then the other thing, I love this picture. This is one of my favorite illustrations because if you look over here on the left, you'll see the turf grass and the really shallow root system there, versus these meadow plants that have the deep root systems. And when rain comes down and washes off your roof, your shingles, asphalt shingles, and off your driveway, carrying little particles of oils and toxins, these roots will clean that water out before it gets down to the water table or goes into a wetland. And lawns just are really not too different from just pavement. And this is another problem. This is another illustration of how things are a little out of whack with lawns. Lawns are our biggest crop. There's over 40 million acres of lawn. And if you look at our area up here in the Northeast, we are quite the lawnificated place up here. So to rethink your lawn, mowing less frequently, even every other week, at setting the mower at 3 inches and mowing every other week. There's a study done by the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station that showed a huge increase in the diversity and number of bees. And they did all these little yards and mowed. They did some once a week, some every other week, and some every 3 weeks. And they found that the biggest diversity of bees happen when you mow every other week at 3 inches. So that kind of thing can make a big difference. And overseeding with clover, that kind of, that gives something that you can mow that also is helpful for and supports, especially bumblebees. But also thinking about reducing the size of your lawn, adding shrubs around the edges, planting more trees. You can let a part of your yard go natural. You can rip up a bit of the lawn and put in a wildflower seeds, which is what I've been doing, like bit by bit, and just being so rewarded with all the bees and butterflies that show up. It's like I can't even get in my car because I have to stand there by my driveway staring at, oh my God, look at this moth. What is this thing? And so the payoff is just amazing when you go for a little bit of a messier look and allow some of those wildflowers instead of lawn. Avoid pesticides. Test your soil to see if you need fertilizer before you add it. Go organic. Leave the leaves in the winter, in the fall. If you can leave them through the winter and clean them up in spring. The leaf matter is where lots of our pollinators overwinter. Lightning bugs, lots of moths, butterflies. The eggs are in the leaves. So if we blow them all away quickly, we're getting rid of that habitat. And the other problem, so I came to this pollinator pathway through my concern about water quality, and water quantity is connected to that now more than ever. So lawns use a ton of water. Turf grass is not native. It requires watering and fertilizing and things to stay that brilliant green. In Lower Fairfield County, these numbers are from Aquarium Water Company. 40% of water is used outdoors, and that number goes to 70% in the summer. So we're using by far most of our water when it's the hottest and driest and our rivers are the lowest, outside to water lawns. And nationally, it's 9 billion gallons of water, drinking water a day that go on lawns. So it took me a while working for a watershed association to really understand the connection between the amount of river water we have and how we're using our water. Like, there is a direct effect. Even if this water comes out of a groundwater from a well in your yard, that groundwater would eventually be seeping into a nearby wetland and helping support a stream. And so there's no way to separate. Water is all connected, and when we use it, it's coming out of the environment, it's coming out of our our rivers. Um, I was doing some talk like a year ago when we were fighting. Aquarian wanted to put new wells in next to the Norwalk River, which was going to take 1 million gallons a day from the Norwalk River, which is already impaired. And we've been working for 2 decades to try to improve water quality. And I was just like, no, you can't do that. So I started really looking into this, and I found this headline and it was when the Cape Town drought was happening, from Cape Town to Connecticut, conserving water for the future. Because here in New England, in Connecticut, we're so water rich compared to really almost anywhere else that we just don't think of this as a limited resource. But given climate change and continuing development and just the way we live, we are starting to have to think about this differently. This is a screenshot from the DEEP's. The Department of Energy and Environmental Protection has a drought page that you can look at, and you can see how dry or wet things are. Right now we are abnormally dry. We've been on the cusp of drought all summer, which you've probably noticed. Our rivers are low. The Norwalk River, I get these emails whenever the stream gauge, there's a U.S. Geological Service stream gauge in the Norwalk River, and when it goes below 3 cubic feet per second, whatever that's the low end of what is safe for aquatic life in our river. When it goes below that, I get an email, and I get an email every day. So this is a good time to think about how you use water, how you can conserve water. And so in Darien, Greenwich, Stanford, and Canaan, Aquarian provides you guys with most of your water if you're not on a well. And as you all know, you've had 2-day-a-week watering restrictions since the drought. We had the drought that went from 2012 to 2017, this 5-year drought, which really woke Connecticut up to the issue of conservation and water planning. But the good news, when those restrictions first went into place, I think irrigation systems were banned for a while. And the numbers that in Greenwich, I happened to be talking to some people from Greenwich yesterday, and the numbers, they went from using 30 million gallons a day to 5 million gallons a day when everyone turned off their irrigation system. So that it shows what a difference we can make. Now those numbers aren't as dry, we aren't saving as much water there because now we have the 2-day-a-week water restriction, but that's in effect permanently. And I think that is a hugely important change that's been made. Those numbers, the amount of water we're using here has also gone up during COVID. I think it's because people are home. It's a drought summer, a dry summer, and almost a drought summer. And people are looking out, using more water, and also everybody's home. You're not like at the office, or you don't go into New York, your kids are probably home. So we're just seeing that effect now. Right now, Aquarian is proposing to double the amount of water it brings from the Bridgeport system down to Darien, New Canaan, Stanford, and Greenwich to help solve this problem, the water shortage problem that we have down here. But that's problematic for the towns in that area, Fairfield and Bridgeport, Easton. Those towns are challenging this proposal because of the effects that it'll have there, and we have to think about future climate change issues. And so anyway, it's complicated. One of the important solutions is water conservation. So I will not drone on forever about water conservation, but some of the solutions, if you do have an irrigation system, smart meters can keep it from coming on until it's really needed. Sometimes you see the irrigation system going off and it's raining and it's like, not necessary. Just reducing waste, making sure you're not watering the pavement, putting in a rain barrel. It took me a really long time to take that step, but we got a rain barrel like a year ago. And then we got a second one to catch the overflow because we found like one of our gutters was getting most of the water from the roof. And I mean, I water our vegetable garden with it. It makes me happy every single time because that's what a nerd I am, I guess. But it really does, especially on these dry days. I've got this big barrel of water that I can use without feeling bad. Planting native plants because they're adapted to our area and don't need as much water. I'm going to talk more about that. Getting used to having golden lawn when it's a heat wave and it's the middle of July, and your grass will come back. I know in Scotland, they have natural golf courses that turn golden when it's dry, and then they become green again, and everyone's okay with it. So I feel like if we could get closer to that model and start accepting that, that's an important evolution for us. And xeriscape landscaping, there's more on the Pollinator Pathway website about this. These are ways to put in gardens that just don't require as much water. There's a beautiful one in Rowayton, actually right at the coast, that the garden club put in that you can see. Pesticides, this is my last water quality thing, I think, but this picture was taken today. A friend of mine sent me this. So pesticides and water quality, I mean, as I said, the pesticides that people use in their gardens and lawns end up running off into the waterways, but also the pesticide trucks are allowed to fill up from our rivers. They just literally can go and stick hoses in the rivers. And people are constantly contacting the Norwalk River Watershed Association because they're horrified by seeing this. And rightly so, I'm horrified by it too. It is allowed up to a certain amount, I've forgotten how many gallons. The problem is, so if you have poisons, like this is a Connecticut tick control truck that was sticking its hose into the Silvermine River this morning, when the Silvermine River is below its lowest level to support aquatic life. So that's upsetting. But Norwalk has a requirement that if you're going to rivers, you have to register, and you have to register each year. When you come in to register, they check your truck that it's fitted out with this valve that keeps the poison from your tanks from washing into the backwashing in as you fill. So it's a really important thing, but most towns, I don't think, have a control system for that. Everyone's required to have these valves, but Norwalk is the only one that I know of that has a way of checking. And I know Weston is in the process of trying to adopt something like that. So I'm not sure if Darien has that or not, but it's worth checking. I feel like local action on things like this could help us maybe change that laws around this, because I'm not sure, maybe in the old days it made sense to stick a hose in the river to fill up your truck, but I feel like we have better options now. But the main Pollinator Pathway message around pesticides is that if you're going to plant to attract pollinators to your yard, don't spray, because then you create an ecological trap. This is on my bike ride through New Canaan. On June 22nd, I saw this sign had just been put up, this yard had just been sprayed, and this catmint was just buzzing with bumblebees. And so I had to get the picture, because this is exactly the problem. It would be better not to have the catmint than to put the catmint in and then spray. And of course we don't know what was sprayed there, and maybe it wasn't sprayed directly on these bees, but it's a good illustration of what the problem is. Also, when you buy plants, I mean, this is something I didn't know until working on this, that often the seeds of plants will have been coated with a pesticide, and there's systemic pesticide in the plant. So the nurseries are coming from the position that people don't want bugs to eat their plants. So they coat them in these pesticides. But if you're planting for wildlife, you actually want caterpillars to eat your plants. So you don't want a monarch to lay an egg on your plant, and then the baby is killed, the baby caterpillar is killed because there's systemic pesticides in the plant. So you can very easily ask about that when you're buying plants. Just say, I'm looking for native plants that are pesticide free. And then obviously a pesticide free yard is safer for pets and people, and there's so much information on that available on our website and everywhere. I'm not going to go into that now. But the alternatives, this picture was taken in my yard, the aphids just about to be gobbled up by this lovely ladybug. And so one of the alternatives is to just create a balance in your yard where you have natural predators and a natural balance, and you don't end up with too many of any one creature. But we say spray yourself instead of your yard. Landscape to repel ticks naturally, because ticks are the big issue, ticks and mosquitoes, and it's legitimate. Lyme disease is a very obviously horrible problem in this area, especially, and mosquitoes are by the coast. So we have to address it. When we started working on the Pollinator Pathway, I was like, I am not gonna like learn all about what to do about ticks. But it's such a huge part of this that we've had to go to all these conferences and talk to scientists and try to figure out, what is the best way to manage this problem. And the answer is, well, removing barberry. Am I running out of time? How am I doing, you guys? I've got like 5 more minutes. Removing barberry, which harbors ticks, and using tick boxes, not the tick tubes with the cotton in them, because the tick tubes and tick boxes have a pesticide in them, and the white-footed mouse comes in and he gets a little dose of the pesticide. So then when he goes back to his nest, the other mice the ticks are killed on the mice. The tick boxes work without the cotton, which is much better, because when the mice take a little bit of the cotton back to their holes, the problem with that is that our native bumblebees like to use mouse holes as their nests. So then when they go in to make their nest there's a little bit of this cotton with the pesticide. So go with tick boxes, not tick tubes. And then Met 52 is a new fungus that is supposed to really attack ticks and not other insects, which nothing else has been able to promise. So it's something brand new to keep your eye out for. And then attracting beneficial insects, talked about that, and just going organic. I threw fertilizer in here too, and test your soil before using it. So this is the change we're looking for: fewer of the yellow signs, more of the pollinator pathway signs. Plant native plants. I'm gonna just go right into if you ever heard me speak before, you've probably already heard this, because this is like my favorite story. The story of the 2 dogwoods. This is our native Cornus Florida, the native dogwood, which has evolved along with the blue azure butterfly that we use as the Pollinator Pathway logo. You can see that even this caterpillar is sort of camouflaged on the branch, and the birds eat the berries. It's just important part of our ecosystem. The Kusa dogwood, which I have in my yard and is beautiful, is a Japanese plant, and actually these little cherry-like berries that come off of that, they are food for this monkey in Japan. So it's a good illustration of how, it's fine to plant exotics and beautiful plant trees like this, but they're not going to be feeding wildlife. So that's the basic pollinator gardening planting plan. All this is available at pollinator-pathway.org, all of our plant lists and how to get started to plant for a bloom through the season. This is our main handout from Kim Stoner, our state entomologist, that gives you a bloom throughout the season. It's important to plant the early blooming plants like this golden Alexander, and then the late blooming plants like New England aster and goldenrod. And then trees and shrubs, also really important backbone to any pollinator garden or pollinator planting. Planting for specialists. This is my favorite primrose moth that I always tell this story because I think people are familiar with the monarch, that it has to have milkweed, but there are a lot of relationships like that. And this little pink moth has to have the evening primrose, which is not the most beautiful thing. It showed up in my little meadow, and I went in there with my clippers to cut it down because I was like, just because it's native, I don't have to keep this like ugly looking plant. And then I saw this moth and I was like, oh, wait a minute, who is this moth? And looked him up and saw that it's the primrose moth. So anyway, I have a lot of evening primrose now, and I've come to love it. Don't cut down your trees to plant a meadow. We hear that from people all the time. Oh, I'm going to clear all the trees out to plant a meadow. The trees are meadows in the sky. They're so important for caterpillars, the host plants for most moths and butterflies are trees. Early blooming shrubs, the queen bumblebees come out first, and they need to find nectar before they lay their eggs for the rest of the bumblebee population. So if you don't have anything that's blooming in late April, May through May, you're not going to have as many bumblebees. everyone always says, what about the deer? And I think if you put a lot of mountain mint and Monarda, this native bee balm around, it really goes a long way towards keeping the deer away. I think I might be running out of time, so I'm going to speed through this. But straight native plants have just evolved with our native populations of pollinators that, in a way that we already talked about. And sometimes native plants, there are cultivars of native plants, but nativars, and there's a lot of research going on about whether or not those are as good at supporting pollinators as the straight natives. And it's just helpful to know how to look for the straight natives. The cultivars and the nativars are going to have sort of funky names, like what does this say? Some of the names are like, weeping Norway spruce. You can tell blue heaven. If you look at a name that sounds like blue heaven, it's probably not a straight native plant. And also just getting in the habit of looking a plant up and finding out if it's a straight native. Where can you go to buy? We recommend all of these places. Copia is probably, and also I don't have on this list, but the Darien store. You can give them a plug, you guys, when you come on, because I know they have a lot of great natives. Ecotype Project, I'm gonna skip for now because I'm running out of time. What else do they need? Pollen and nectar from native plants, larval host plants, the trees we talked about, a little bit of fresh water available in your yard, a dish or a bird bath or something, dirt patches in the ground, old wood. These are what bees need for nesting, and that is going to wrap me up. The basis of the idea of Ptolemy's work. If you haven't read his books, I'll leave you with that as a next step. And then you can always contact me if you have questions, info@norwalkriver.org, Pollinator Pathway. This is our website where all the info is. And I am going to pass over, I'm going to unshare my screen and pass the mic over to Deepika Saxena and Juliet Kane, who are the organizers of the Darien Pollinator Pathway and are doing amazing things. And you should all stop what you're doing and join them, get in on their efforts. And so I'm going to stop.
So good evening, I'm Deepika Saxena, and this here is Juliet Kane, and we're going to shift gears a little and talk a little bit about what we're doing in Darien. And to start off with, I'll give you a little history of what we are doing here, and I hope that as you listen to us, you will be encouraged to use some of these things in your gardens, and also be excited enough to join us in what we do. We're looking for a lot of volunteers to help us in this great cause. We started work on the Darien Pollinator Pathway in the summer of 2018 when we heard Louise speak about the Pollinator Pathway in Ridgefield. Ridgefield had just come on board then. We decided to join the pathway and form partnerships with the Darien Nature Center, the Garden Club of Darien, the Gardeners Center and Florist, Darien Board of Realtors. And we formally kicked it off in March of 2019 by inviting Doug Tallamy, the one that Louise just introduced. He's the entomologist at the University of Delaware. So after his talk, where he talked about the essential roles that insects play, and he described the simple changes we must make in our landscapes, which Louise has referred to, we were really excited about it, and the event was very well attended. And to continue to raise awareness and education, we participated in several town events where we handed out important information, and we also raised funds for printing brochures, etc., as well as materials for some demonstration gardens. Some of these we'll describe to you in a few minutes. So this year, due to the coronavirus, we focus mostly on outdoor activities where we can maintain the social distance while also benefiting pollinators. We planted some native gardens in Darien that Juliet and I will talk about. In addition to all her other positions, Juliet is co-chair of the Darien Beautification. She'll tell you about the native garden planted at Darien Town Hall and the work we're doing in town to help stop the usage of pesticides and other chemicals on town playing fields. So over to Juliet now, who'll tell you about some of the native gardens we planted this year.
Okay, thank you, Deepika. Well, last year, Darien Parks and Rec invited us to create a pollinator garden at Tilly Pond Park. And we started work in November. the ground was, you can see in these photos, true park ground, very compacted turf that would have been very difficult to dig up. So we decided to try a passive bed preparation instead. And this involves layering newspaper and cardboard over the turf. And the idea is to suppress the weeds, to soften the earth, soften the turf. And after a few months, it'll be much easier to dig. So the middle photo shows shows the cardboard that we've been laying, freshly laid. And then the photo on the right shows our sort of final collage. And unfortunately, because it was November, we couldn't get any mulch. Ideally, it would have been good to mulch over the card, so this way it'd be hidden and it would help the cardboard degrade. But we ended up putting on rocks and branches, and it did look a little strange, but it worked quite well, and we didn't get any complaints from the neighbors. So it comes to spring, and Deepika is stuck in India, and so I had to enlist help. And you can see on the left-hand side, the soil is quite rich and weed-free. There's a little bit of weed at the front where the cardboard had lifted, but it was still the ground was still quite soft and easy to dig up. And on the right-hand side, you can see the ground ready for planting, and it didn't take too long. So this is the planting that we did. We planted a broad selection of natives, and we knew we'd lose quite a few because the garden is open at all hours and available to any animal wanting to snack. But by and large, we did well. And this is a before and after photo. You can see on the right that we had the surviving plants, the agastache, the butterfly weed, done very well. We had to replace blue lobelia. And we've kept the zizia that Louise mentioned just now, although the flowers seem to be a delicacy to some animal. And we also worked with the greenhouse group at the Darien Community Association. And again, we did a passive bed preparation here when we were reclaiming some overgrown beds. And Louise, I wanted to let you know that we also installed a rain barrel here too, that's made life quite easy when we've been planting native plants here. And the photo on the left shows the cardboard newly laid. It's all very fresh and looks like its box is ripped up, which in fact it is. And then on the right, you can see how the cardboard has degraded and really become one with the soil. And there are no weeds whatsoever. And I think in this case, we won't even have to remove any of this cardboard because it's degrading so nicely. And this is actually a very good way to get rid of some of your shallow rooted water junkie lawn, if you're so inclined. It's incredibly efficient and effective, and will help you conserve water. As Louise has been talking about how important that's going to be. And you can plant your native plants in lieu of your lawn and create really good pollinator habitat. Now, as Deepika mentioned, and I'll race through these slides, I'm also co-chair of the Darien Beautification Commission. And the mission of the beautification group is to improve the overall physical appearance of Darien. But we have decided that we can be true to the mission and still emphasize the environmental aspects of that mission. So we can improve aesthetics at the same time as we enhance our environment. And our first project was to improve the appearance of the town hall slopes, which frankly wasn't that difficult given this before picture. You can see how awful they looked. And on the right hand, you can see how the slope had eroded. So the plan was to plant native plants here and create a pollinator habitat. We worked with Public Works, who cleared the slopes for us. And then we added jute matting for additional erosion control. As Louise showed on the slide, the root system of the native plants is very deep. And so ultimately these slopes would be held in place by that root system. But before the roots were established, it was important to just add some additional protection. And this is us planting with a landscaping crew, and you can see how deep that slope is on the right-hand side. And here are some shots, just a few weeks of growth and then several weeks of growth on both sides. And we've had enormous challenges with the drought and the hurricanes. And I have been to the slopes every time after a storm, expecting to see all the plants and the soil washed into the parking lot and having to explain it to the Board of Selectmen. But everything's still intact. And now we have lots of very colorful visitors, and I took these photos of the various bees and butterflies that we're we're seeing. And you can actually do this at home. So this is a photograph on the left-hand side of a bed at my house, which at its widest is 2 feet and is about 100 feet long. And I had a very intrusive hedge in there, and pulled it out and replaced it with natives. You see blue wood phlox, and then red columbine, and then this photo on the left I took this morning, blue lobelia, there's aster growing in the background, and then some of my very colorful visitors to the anise hyssop, the agastache. Well, talking about colorful, we gave a presentation, as Deepika had mentioned, to Darien Parks and Recs Commission in July, and the purpose was to urge the adoption of organic practices on town playing fields. We were joined by 2 experts, Dr. Sarah Evans from Mount Sinai Children's Hospital and Anne Hulick from the Clean Water Action Group. The Parks and Recs Department in our town sprays pesticides on the town playing fields each year, and this is permitted under the current law. That law only prohibits the spraying of pesticides on school playing fields for grades kindergarten through 8th grade. So this means that when the children are at school and using the school playing fields, they're protected. But after school, if they play on the town fields, they're exposed to pesticides. And Dr. Evans explained that children are uniquely vulnerable, even with low exposures. They are closer to the ground than adults, have more hand-to-mouth contact, they breathe more rapidly than we do, and that makes it more likely they'll ingest toxins. And their immune systems aren't fully developed. And because they live for many years, they're more likely to develop chronic long-term illnesses from any exposure. And we, the Pathway, we spoke about the fact that even if a pesticide product is registered, doesn't really mean that it's safe. The EPA doesn't perform its own testing, it's the pesticide manufacturer who performs the testing. And most of the ingredients in the product aren't even tested. There's no, they're not tested, they're not disclosed, because there's no requirement that those chemicals be labeled. And so we don't even know what most of the product contains. And there's also no requirement for the manufacturer to test the chemicals in combination. So in any pesticide product, it is a combination of chemicals. So in effect, it means that the final product is untested. And then as Louise had mentioned, pesticides are a significant contributor to our declining pollinator numbers. And so, we are, I would say, cautiously optimistic that Parks and Recs is taking this on board. If you'd like to hear more, you can see the video on Channel 79. And if you'd really like to support us, you can write to the Parks and Recs Commission or write to the newspaper. So Deepika is now going to talk about another restoration project that we're doing at the Darien Nature Center. This area is a wetland, and we're trying to get rid of the invasive Phragmites without the use of chemicals.
We figured no talk is complete unless we talk about invasive weeds.
Exactly.
So I figured this is a good project to include in here. Last year, we had wanted to plant a pollinator garden in the Darien Nature Center. This area was covered with Phragmites that you can see on the left of the screen. It's a tall invasive weed that outcompetes native plants, thereby leading to a reduction in native plant and wildlife species. Our goal was to prepare the area for a fall planting in 2019. But when we cleared the area, we realized that the plant has thick interwoven rhizomes that go down 5 feet below the surface. So one suggested method to get rid of this nasty invasive organically was to choke it by covering it with a tarp for a whole year. So we did just that. We got this tarp and we laid it and wedged it firmly on the edges with soil so air could not get through. So the photograph on the left shows that. So this spring, we were quite shocked to discover that deer grow through the tarp. So this year we redoubled our efforts, put another layer of tarp, and now we're in the process of surrounding it with a deer fence. We also laid a thick pile of wood chips, like 2 or 3 feet high on the sides. Oh, my internet's, can you hear me? I hope you all can hear me. Between the pollinator garden within the fence and the weeds outside. The photo on the right shows that. This deer fence shown. So around 3 feet, especially the mites and the mugwort, mowed down to ground level. And our current plan is to keep this till the fall of 2021. So this approach obviously requires a lot of patience, but it yields a permanent solution. It may be tempting to use chemicals and to try to get an instant result, but that would be a very temporary solution, and we would end up putting chemicals in the ground. So now I want to tell you about an exciting project that we embarked on in New Haven this year. In preparation for this new project and to raise funds, we had a plant sale in June of 2020 of this year. We sold about 500 plants of 15 different varieties, ranging from milkweeds to the more exotic Lobelia cardinalis and wild blue indigo. Some of these we grew from seeds, while others were dug out from our yards. The goal here was to spread native plants within our community, as well as to raise money for our project. We advertised it on social media, etc. And the plants were sold out within half a day, and we raised about $2,000. So we plan to have more such events and hope that some of you who are here today will donate native plants from your own yards for the sale, all for a good cause. So what is this project? Early this year, we realized that the coronavirus is not just a health crisis, it's an environmental justice crisis. Why are more people from low-income communities getting sick and dying from corona? As you may already be aware, inequality is linked to the environment in many ways, including lack of access to clean air, clean water, open spaces, and fresh food. Air, water, and ground pollution from these toxic chemicals and food contaminants all increase the risk of not just corona, but also cancer, heart disease, diabetes, asthma, and many other illnesses. So for all the reasons that Louise has mentioned in the talk and Juliet has mentioned, we, the Pollinator Pathway, must find ways to connect the pathway to urban communities and translate our knowledge of native plants and environmental sustainability into practical support for movements for racial and economic equality. With this in mind, the Darien Pollinator Pathway engaged on a project in the underserved community of New Hallville, an inner city neighborhood of New Haven. We partnered with Louise and Mary Clay Flynn from Norwalk Pollinator Pathway and Doreen Abubakar, the founder of Community Placemaking Engagement Network, CPEN. Doreen is a visionary who has been working for many years in challenged neighborhoods in New Haven to connect the community to nature, to create safe, clean, open spaces with pollinator plantings, and to use these spaces for educational outreach to neighborhood youth and families. We'll now show you a video that captures what Doreen had envisioned and how we worked together to bring it to fruition. And today we're going to build a prototype for pen, actually. Remember, you should always wear your safety glasses. Here, 1 and 2.
What I'm trying to do is teach people income-producing opportunities, okay? An opportunity for people to learn a skill set, not only for their own self-gardening skills, grow their own stuff, but also they can learn how to do something well and make it into a business. Yep. Good. I was at the Pollinators last year at Tim Stoner's conference. Is when I heard about Pollinator Pathway. And I said, wow, it would be really neat to see if I could be a lead person for it, because everything I do is about sort of connecting the urban community to its own natural habitats and environments. But you gave me another platform. You gave me a platform so I could be a part of that conversation. So that's what we're doing. We can't do anything without money. We can't do anything without resources. And so we really appreciate the offer. They make bat houses. So we thought it would be great. Why not teach the kids how to make it, pay them a little something, and we could also sell them. That's why, the Learning Quarter is the ideal spot, not only to bring up economic development for this community, but to see people recognizing that people are doing something. They're doing something, though, because they have the opportunity to learn to do something. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make this place a hub where we can invite people from all these various places to come and get information and share information, and at the same time provide programming and stuff to engage the community in learning and training and things like that.
So if we get this one done first, if we get you better.
How long do you think it'll take to make it? I've always been a person who wanted to take the urban communities and connect them to nature and find ways to do that.
Thank everybody for coming. Thank you so much for your interest in the Pollinator Pathway. It's been such an amazing thing to be part of. It's really just an idea. It's not even an organization at this point. It's an idea that's been spreading, and it's a grassroots movement, really, it's a town owned. Each town has its own look. Darien has its own look of the way, things are happening, and it looks different in the cities and in the areas that are more farm oriented, but it's just happening everywhere. It's cool. Oh, I see some questions. How late in the season can we plant some of the native plants you mentioned? You'd be good at answering that, Juliet, but fall is a great time to plant. It's both a great time to seed if you wanted to do that cardboard project and take out part of your lawn, either dig out part of the grass, a little section, or do the cardboard session. Putting down the seeds in late fall, right before the frost, is the best time to put down a seed mix of native pollinator wildflower mix. I've done that in 2 sections in my yard, and it's been so easy. Just at the end of the season, I took out a section of grass, got a native wildflower mix from either Ernst Wildflowers in Pennsylvania, or Prairie Moon is good, American Meadows, and just put them down, and then in the spring they start coming up. You can also put it's a good time to do trees and shrubs as well, right? Anything to add to that, you guys? It's a great time to plant.
Yeah, actually fall is the best time to plant, and just you don't have to water it as much, and just get it going. And then the spring comes, and spring is usually wet, so so they get a good start.
Yeah.
And they can be plugs, they can be plants, they can be trees, they can be shrubs, any of those.
Plugs, are plugs okay though? We had somebody write in a question about this, and I think plugs take a little, if you're going to plant plugs, which are like the teeny baby.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Yeah.
They have to be planted a little bit earlier in order to establish before the first freeze. So bigger plants and seeds are good for late fall, and plugs I would do like.
I would do plugs in the spring, probably.
In the spring.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bulbs. We don't have a lot of native bulbs. There are a couple. There's a beautiful one. Julia, do you know the Turk's cap? The Turk's cap is a native bulb that's beautiful, and there's a Canada lily that's a native bulb that's beautiful. But for the most part, the bulbs are not some of our best native plants. But some of the early blooming bulbs that I have in my yard, they are really important for the bees, for the bumblebees. So I don't think daffodils are particularly have much for the pollinators, but some of the others do.
I agree.
I mean, the spring ephemerals are a good counter option to some of the spring bulbs. If you go to a place like Native or especially Earth Tones up in Woodbury, if you've ever made the trek up there, there's a couple that have been running this native plant experience is really what you have to say. For the past 25 years, they have literally been going out in the woods and collecting the wild native seeds, propagating them and growing them. So when you shop there, you're walking around the trails there and the upland sunny areas, you see the meadow plants, and then they have a wetland area. It's just a gorgeous sort of mini Connecticut native plant experience. And that is a place that you can get some of the really beautiful, delicate spring ephemerals that are good for supporting the bees.
Yes, I think the I bought my red columbine from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Also, early spring is also good for some of the trees that flower early, like the red bud or the a spice bush or the they flower pretty early, and those
are really important. Yeah. So there's more questions. Do you have to mow annually? So for maintaining a meadow, if you're going to keep a meadow from growing woody plants over time, you should mow it annually or every other year. I mean, I haven't mowed mine. If I see a pine tree coming up, I just like cut it. But generally, if you have a large area, that's what's recommended. And the key for supporting pollinators is the timing of that mowing. And so if you could do in late winter, like into February or into March, it will leave those meadow plants, the seed heads are such important food for the migrating birds that are coming back down through, and habitat for the pollinators. So leaving, and they're beautiful. I think those dried seed heads through the winter are just gorgeous. Yeah. So waiting to mow is the best thing to do. And then can you rake your leaves and put them in another area of your property and still be effective? Yes, very good point. I usually try to say that because if you leave really thick piles of leaves on your grass, it will make spots in the lawn. It will kill the grass. So what I do is rake the leaves to the edges, especially if you have beds just pile them up in the beds and let them stay there. And you're allowed to mulch mow some of them or get rid of some of them. It's just the idea of blowing every single leaf off and leaving no habitat.
And actually, it's a good idea to keep some part of it, untouched, because there are a lot of, snails and other critters that are
leave it where it falls. Yeah, if you can leave it where it falls, that's like the ideal thing. But I understand, like,
an area that has that is nice.
Yeah, and it's really fun to look at. The Xerxes Society if you're not familiar with it, it's an invertebrate society that supports pollinators. They have such great information, and they have these illustrations of which moths and butterflies need which leaves, and it's so fun to look at. Like red oak leaves, I have the Luna moth, and so you start to realize the actual specific characters that might be showing up if you stop raking. Yeah. Are all leaves good? That's a good question. I think leaf matter. So there are relationships. Like I know the Luna moth has a relationship with the oak tree. I think maybe that's such a good question. I'm not sure if non-native leaf matter is less important. I know there are special relationships. I'm going to have to find out more about that.
I think if you're looking for leaves to drop them so that these things can overwinter in them, because they're already on those leaves, and when the leaves fall down, they're already kind of part of that. But if you're just looking for organic matter to fertilize your beds or your lawn, then I think all leaves are probably pretty good.
Yeah, and if you get thinking about it, I did read that the time to either mulch, mow, or get rid of the leaves in the spring around is 56 degrees. So that's like very detailed, but I liked knowing that. So it also gives you the excuse of not having to clean up your yard so quickly in the spring. You can wait, you can relax, you can wait a little while. Okay, we have some more questions here. The work each of you has been doing is really inspirational. Thank you for sharing and for informing all of us here. I live in row 8 and am constantly saddened by the number of yellow fertilizer pesticide signs I see in the yards throughout our towns, a rough majority of houses, I'd presume. Is there a way to partner with local landscaping companies to encourage them to offer organic solutions instead of these quick fix chemicals to their customers? Perhaps a bit off topic, but curious. while I have this expert panel. That's such a good point, and we probably all want to talk about that at once. But I think it's really important to work with your current landscaper and ask them, say, you know, what other options do you have? I want my yard to look neat and good, but I don't want to use any chemicals, and involve them in this process of changing the way we do things. And then if you run into a brick wall, the Connecticut NOFA, the Northeast Organic Farm Association, has a list of accredited organic lawn care companies that is on the Pollinator Pathway website. So if you do need an option, if you do need to switch, there are lots of options now. But I think working with your people is to get them to grow and change the way what they offer is good.
Yeah, and Louise, the Connecticut NOFA offers the organic land care professional course, and
Right.
every so often they offer it for free. And Deepika and I have both done that. I don't know if you've done that, but when I went, there were several landscaping companies, and they offer a simultaneous course in Spanish, so you can have Spanish headset. You can take the exam in Spanish, and so it might be quite daunting for a landscaping company to be told, well, you really should go organic. But there's a stepping stone that they could take, and that course is very manageable and very, very helpful.
And they usually have it in late fall, so it's not a busy time for them. So, and
they offer a free course too, which is great.
So I have a private question here, but I'm just going to read it out because I don't have time to type the answer. But how can an agency in another state team with you in your Pollinator Pathway project to do some scheduled managed solo projects to strategically increase pollinator habitat? That sounds like a great opportunity, and I invite you to email me. I'm going to put my email in here. Let me just put that for everybody. I'll just remind you guys. So if you have more questions like that, I'm happy to talk more. And it's info@norwalkriver.org.
And we put up
the Pollinator Pathway really is all about teaming up together and sharing ideas and forming partnerships, and that has been the amazing part of this. And unlikely partnerships have come out. We're working with Habitat for Humanities now to do pollinator gardens in all the new houses, and I'm just always happy to hear about new ideas to partner. And yeah, other states, I mean, this is becoming a regional thing. So we're working with New Jersey and Massachusetts and New York, Connecticut, Pennsylvania. So yes, there's no limit here. Are there brands of organic fertilizer you recommend, and where would we be able to get them? So I am not an expert on organic fertilizer. We've spent a lot of time looking at organic pesticides, and a lot of those are still harmful to pollinators, and we have a lot of information about how to figure that out on the website. Organic fertilizers are so much better to use than chemical ones. And I don't know particular brands. Do you guys? Do you guys know particular brands?
I guess the first thing I'd say is try compost before you
try
anything that you buy. So if you can compost your your fruits and vegetables in your own home composter, or share with somebody else's, I think that's the optimal way. It's certainly in our town, the Gardener Center and Florist has some options. I think Coast of Maine has organic fertilizers, but I guess we'd say really try to stick with compost, something that you know isn't messed with.
And the thing I learned in this process is that I had never had my soil tested. And I thought, well, that's just not something I know how to do. Like, that's too hard. I'm just going to fertilize. And then it's actually very easy, because you just take a little bit of your soil, and it's free. And you can go to the experiment station, and there are other places. Just Google, how do I get my soil tested? And then you find out what's missing and what you really need to add. So then you're adding what's needed, because if you put excess stuff, it's really just going to wash off into the river. Hollytone, plant tone, bulb tone, all organic. Yeah, I think if you look and read labels and ask wherever you shop, and make sure you want organic fertilizer. That's
also, you can check the omri.org. Organic Materials Research Institute.org. If it is organic, it'll be listed.
And you might not need it. I mean, a lot of,
Yeah.
I always try to mention, like, there's cost savings here in rethinking your lawn, because mowing less often, using less fertilizer, you know, doing less of all of the stuff that we've been told we have to do all these years. You know, just sit in your lawn chair and sip your sip your iced tea instead of putting down fertilizer and
Yeah,
mowing.
I think you have to change your mindset, you know. Does a lawn that doesn't look perfect, do you like that, or do you like something that looks so perfect which you're afraid to walk on because it's full of pesticides?
And give yourself time to evolve. So we did this. Weston, the town of Weston Pollinator Pathway was doing a big push for no mow May, because the early the violets and the early blooming lawn flowers in May are so important. And so I did no mow May, and I mowed the edges. I mowed pathway around it, so it looked intentional and somewhat neat. But I evolved, and now I'm thinking, oh, maybe I could put a little meadow in there. It looked sort of messy to me at first, and then, you know, it's all about what we think is beautiful, what our eye sees as appealing. And now when I see, you know, little flowering little clovers and bees, that is so much more beautiful to me than a neat, lifeless. But I've come a long way in the last 5 years. Like, I just think it's a process for people.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the ideas I have for that is to look at the Pete Udolph books, you know, the landscaper for the High Line, because he has the most amazing books where he's planted these meadows and he keeps them all year round, and they are just stunning in the winter and the fall, even though they're dead seed heads, dead leaves, and what would be cleansed in an American garden is absolutely beautiful. It's just changing the way we look at it.
So I was so influenced by that movie about the Four Seasons film about his work. You know how it shows the drawings where he's drawn,
yes, they're
how he plans out his gardens of like a little monarda here and milkweed here. And so I completely copied that and went out and, you know, dug up these little sections of grass. I mean, mine looks nothing like a Pete Udolph, but it's inspiring to look at his process.
Yeah.
Well, I also found that when we were doing the town hall slopes, I very religiously got a rectangle that kind of approximated the slope, and I did my grid, and I did very symmetric grids, and I drew bubbles for plants, and I drew this sort of perfect geometric shape that didn't really translate into an undulating slope, but it was fine. And then after we planted, I picked up Pete Udolph's book, and I saw these beautiful drawings that were artistic with just and funny shapes that looked like teeth, and I thought, no, and I did all that measuring for nothing.
So someone's asking, Juliet, can you write down the names of those books?
Yes, that's Joanne. I'm not sure I can do it off the top of my head. Let me think about it. It's called his
name is Pete. It's P-I-E-T,
because then you can just go to
this is spelled wrong. It's not going to be helpful, but it's
P-I-E-T.
Yeah.
Udolph is O-U-D for David, U-L-F for Frank.
Okay, so I almost had it right. U-L-F. There you go. Pete Udolph, and he has a bunch of books.
Yes. The one I bought was
somebody who took a lot of American native prairie plants to Europe and designed with them, and then came back here and designed with them here. So I didn't press return. Pete Udolph. Yeah.
That's it.
And also, if anybody hasn't read, it happens to be sitting right here, but if you have not read Bringing Nature Home, the Doug Ptolemy's first book, or any of his books, that's really the ideas for what the Pollinator Pathway is about come from his books.
Yeah, that's what got me started.
Yeah. This was so fun. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, everybody, for attending and letting me ramble on about Pollinator Pathway.
Thank you, ladies, for giving such an informative talk.
Thanks a lot. Oh, wait, one new message. Hold on, I've got a message. Oh, thank you. We're getting some thank yous. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Have a good night.
Bye.